Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to the wonderful Petra Boynton. We're talking about bullying in academia, what it looks like, what you might do if it's happening to you or if you see it happening to somebody else. I usually say I hope you enjoy this episode. That feels the wrong thing to say for this subject matter, but I do hope that you find it useful. Hello, Petra.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. I've said just before we got on, I was confessing to you that I have been stalking you by reading your brilliant book. We're going to have all the details. I'm sure we're going to kind of touch on stuff that's in the book in the interview, and I'm going to have all the details in the show notes. But the kind of the thoughtfulness and the wisdom that you bring, and also the hard-won personal experience that you bring to what we're going to be talking about today, I think it's going to just help so many people. And I'm just so delighted that you are talking about these things and sharing that information. And so thank you so much for coming here to talk to us about it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, as I say, we're going to get into talking about bullying in particular, bullying in academia in particular, in a minute. But first of all, I'm going to ask, as I do with everybody, for you to just talk a little bit about your own story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my PhD is still one of the things I'm most proud of achieving. Like probably lots of people listening, I wasn't tipped to be an academic success. I was told to leave school at 16 and that I really shouldn't continue in education. It's since been discovered I've got a learning disability, but that wasn't picked up while I was at school. I did my PhD in applied human psychology, and I was looking at the impact of sexually explicit media on attitudes and behaviour. And at the time, I couldn't get funding for that. There'd been a big government inquiry that had concluded that this wasn't an area of interest. And so I kind of studied it at the wrong time, if you like. And so I self-funded my study. I did jobs like cleaning and I worked as a night care attendant. And later on, I got a lecturing job and that helped offset my fees. My first year of my PhD, I think, was really a very successful year. Although I was self-funding, I was very pleased to be doing it. I felt it was laying to rest quite a lot of demons that I had around, the fact that I wasn't clever and I shouldn't be there. And I bought my first home. My fiancé and I bought a home, and I had a life plan that my life plan was by the time I was 25, my PhD would be done. I would have an academic job and I would have started a family. And I think everybody listening knows that life never goes to plan.
Mine,
yes. Didn't. It doesn't, does it? It just doesn't go to plan. And I know we're always encouraged to have, these life plans and goals. And even when you go for interviews, it's like, what's your 5-year goal? And it would be lovely if this stuff worked, but it doesn't at all. So in my second year of my PhD, I went part-time because I was living in Brighton, I was commuting to Birmingham where I was doing my PhD, and I was also working with all these other jobs, and it was exhausting. So I went part-time, and en route travelling between Brighton and Birmingham, I helped somebody who was sick, and I caught hepatitis A from them. And it's not a great thing to have, but in most cases, it's something that passes. You're ill for a while and it passes. In my case, it led to complications that were misdiagnosed, and I was sick for most of my 20s. And for reasons I still don't understand, people often are surprised when I say this, but I still don't understand, my relationship broke down during that time. I don't think it was because I was sick, but I don't think being sick helped. It probably was a lot to do in the PhD, but I had to move out. I miscarried, my first miscarriage during this time, and I moved out, and I obviously lost my home and my fiancé and my pets. And all of those were hard losses, I think, to have. But I, was committed to doing a PhD, and being truthful, I didn't know really what else to do. I think when you're sad and grieving and really lost, you cling to something. And for me, that was a PhD. It was an identity. It was more of an identity than being sick, although I was that too. It was more of an identity than being disabled, although I was that as well. It was something that I could talk about, that I didn't feel carried sort of shame and stigma with it. Along with it. So I kept going. I had minimal supervision. I think that's a lot of a case that people who are self-funding report. And I had several periods of time off because I had to have operations and I was sick. So obviously that affected my finances. I was already in debt because I was self-funding, but I got more in debt because I had to keep moving to find better accommodation and also to just try and survive. I had a teaching job, but it wasn't really enough. And of course, it didn't pay when I wasn't working. It was sessional work. So if I didn't turn up to work, I didn't get paid. As I got into my writing up period, actually things seemed a bit more settled. I was actually feeling a little better health-wise, and I was really getting on okay. But unfortunately, at that time, as I think lots of people will recognise, my department imploded. It was nothing to do with me, but my supervisor went one way and my department went another way, and the place where my PhD was housed was in a different place again. So I had the choice that I could stay in a funded job but not do the PhD, or I could keep doing the PhD within the doctoral program, but there was no longer any work. And I think I had 5 or 6 weeks to find another job, which I did. So I ended up moving again, and I was living outside London, working in London and studying in Birmingham, while so writing up my PhD. And I navigated that by getting a job where I could do compressed hours. So I worked from Monday to Thursday in the paid job, and then I wrote up from Friday to Sunday, and I did that for a year and then finished and submitted my PhD. And I think I often refer to my PhD as my anchor. It's the thing that kind of that held me steady. But I think anchors also weigh you down. And being really truthful, sometimes I look back and think it might have been better if I quit, actually, that I did something else, a different job. But in a way, it also fitted with me being ill, in that I had sort of some leeway, some things I could still be working on, and some sort of, although it was sessional work, it was also flexible work that perhaps in a full-time job would have been harder. But it wasn't easy. And I did win, actually, a Cosmopolitan magazine award for education, for my services to education, for all of these struggles. And that was nice. But I also look back sometimes and think, I don't know how I did it. I really don't know how I did it. But I think it has meant that it's made me, I hope, a much better supervisor, and that I do my best at all times to pass on information to postgrads now, because I think, I know how hard it can be.
Oh my goodness. So I said at the beginning, this is hard won knowledge, and what a story, and this sense of lots of common themes coming through, but you've had all of them. So lots of people have difficulties, but there was so much for you, and the fact that now you want to address these issues, some of which are systemic, that to really make sure that people are well supported as they go forward. But let's just take a moment to recognise that Cosmopolitan Award was absolutely deserved. And I think it just this sense of that your insight and empathy, and that's what really comes through in the book, that actually that experience, it could have gone many different ways, but for you it seems to have taken you to a place of real empathy, and this impulse to make things different for other people so they don't have to go through it. So let's then address this issue of bullying, and this isn't easy to go into, because it's not talked about. It's endemic, I think, in academia. There's a lot of it that goes on, but we don't really talk about it very much. And I'm really grateful that you are articulating and signposting people for help. So can you just tell us a little bit about the work that you've done around bullying in academia, and what's going on out there? What are the common things?
Yeah, I mean, as you sort of heard when I was relaying my PhD experiences there, that I suppose my first experience of it was witnessing it happening to other people. And I think that's very true. I think depending on which research you read, it's anything between 40 and 75% of us have either directly witnessed or know it goes on in academia. And it seems to be higher in academia than lots of other places. But certainly my first experience was watching other people, quite senior people, interestingly. We often think of it as sort of senior staff bullying junior staff, and I think for postgrads that can be a definite worry and something they go through. But I was really watching people at a very high level discredit and tear into each other, and it was quite frightening actually to see. And I think we often see that now, in that people are thinking about, well, why am I doing a PhD when I'm seeing on social media or in the news these terrible stories of what academia is really like, and maybe I don't want to go there after all. So I think that was my first glimpse of it, is witnessing it sort of all falling apart, and that rapid shift of me having to go and find a job somewhere else. And then I went and worked in an NHS research job, and I was bullied in that job. And it was not pleasant. And then I went into another job, which was within a university, but on a healthcare project, because I'd sort of defected from psychology to healthcare by then. And I couldn't really believe it. But actually, yet again, I wasn't the only person being bullied. But in that department, the whole place was really a real problem with bullying. In that the tactic of bullying in that place was that people were almost on a rota. So you could be in favour one week, but the next week you wouldn't be. And people were kind of played off against each other. And that was really unpleasant. And so I think around that time, I was doing a lot of training on safety for researchers, because a lot of my work is on sensitive topics. And people would ask me to come and do training on how to stay safe. But at the end of every one of those classes that I did, somebody, often more than one person, would come up privately or email me and say, but actually the danger I'm facing isn't out there in the field. It isn't out there in my project. It's in my department. That's where I'm being racially abused. That's where the homophobic abuse is. That's where I'm being mocked or overworked or, almost like forced to fail, set up for a failure. All sorts of things, really very childish behaviours. Quite often people would report that were still very debilitating, of sort of mocking and name calling, through to hiding equipment or actually shoving and aggressive behaviour. And so I think I changed the training, first of all, so it was accommodating bullying. But then in 2005, I think it was, I did a survey with the Times Higher, and we looked at the sort of prevalence across the UK of bullying, and that showed that it was really ridiculously high. I mean, there's always the risk, I think, with these surveys or any kind of research on this, that you get people wanting to talk about being bullied, and therefore it will inflate it somewhat. But even so, I think that study after study, internally by universities and externally, keeps showing us that bullying is a problem in academia all over the world.
So I mean, I've just, again, it's breathtaking and so troubling that this does go on. And if you mention it in conversation, people will have stories to tell you. Guarantee will have stories to tell you. So what can we do about it? And I suppose I'm thinking systemically, of course, we need to do something about it. We need to address it. But I suppose I'm thinking for individuals who might be listening to this, do you have some thoughts and advice on what people might be able to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'll start with if it's happening to you, I think, and we'll do if you're witnessing it, because there's sometimes it overlaps in the both. But I think that if it's happening to you, I think the first thing is that you get a support system around you. I think this sort of life raft in the title of the PhD, life raft, is the key here, in that you need your life raft there. You need a support network, and it doesn't have to be people who are doing a PhD or in your department or colleagues or anything else. It might be friends and family, and their job isn't just to support you through the bullying, but it's to provide an alternative. Because I think when you are being bullied, you become so muddle-headed about it. People talk to me about feeling like their head's full of spaghetti, or foggy, that they can't work out what they're supposed to be doing. They can't stop thinking about it. They will overwork because, one of the things is if you're being picked on, you're so frightened of either it being true, the awful things you're being told, or that you are in some way going to lose your PhD or your job or whatever it is, that you'll overwork to compensate for it. You're almost trying to not suck up to the bully, but sometimes that it can be that, but it's much more just self-preservation. So your family and your friends and this network that you build, and it can be online or offline, are the people who are there on your side. They're there to distract you, that you're not just thinking about this all the time, that you've got other things, whether it's a film or chatting to somebody or a dinner together or something that's taking you away from that kind of horror and hostility that you're living with. I think it's also noting, and maybe it's through a diary or some other way of how you're physically and mentally affected. It might be your appetite or your sleep or your mood. You might find that you're being really grumpy with people or very tearful, or you feel like you can't bear going into work. It's interesting that the symptoms of burnout and the reactions of bullying are very common. So noticing that, I think, would be important. Joining a union, and that might be within your university. It might be forming a union. It might be joining a support network through maybe a professional body or organisation, depending on where you are. So, for example, if you're doing a PhD and you're working in the NHS, which often has overlaps in both academic bullying and NHS bullying, that you find other professional organisations and unions to join there. A lot of them have got really good practical advice. Some of them have got helplines, and we'll share all of that in the notes, that if you are affected, there are places you can turn to. I think also alongside that is just giving yourself permission to feel what you're feeling. And that might be anger, it might be fear, it might be all sorts of things. The next thing, I think, and the reason I've mentioned having all of these systems in place first, is that you need energy and some level of comfort to do the next bit. But the next bit is the brave bit, and it's about gathering receipts. It's getting evidence. So that could be that your bully has emailed you something awful, or that they've said or done something, or they've sabotaged your work, or that you've got proof of stuff they're doing. Collating that is important. You might not feel able to, and again, it might be a friend or family member does that job for you. I would say going and looking at legislation and all the legals here. Your university will have ethical guidelines. It will have codes of conduct. It will have professional guidelines. It will have supervisory guidelines. Your doctoral program or office or grad school or whatever you call it will have information on what your supervisor or your colleagues or your peers should be doing. And I'm saying that because quite often we tend to think about the bullying happening from a supervisor to supervisee, but actually it can be the other way around. Students can bully supervisors. Supervisors can be bullied among the academic system. Other people working in your organisation, it might be the person who's doing your admin or the cleaning or catering, may also be being bullied. And it can be peers bullying one another. So I think however it's coming at you, noting what the professional codes of conduct within your university are, and if they don't exist, other universities have them, is really important. You can also draw on library, study skills, disability office, other places that might exist, chaplaincy, and you can use them strategically. Some might be the place that you offload and feel, others are where you're actually gathering records and information about what's going on. Your doctor might be able to help in terms of if you need sort of signing off or any kind of evidence about it affecting your physical or mental health. Basically, as much information you can gather is important, and also witnesses. If you can get witnesses, so much the better.
Brilliant advice there. And I think this key thing about clarity and perspective, which of course is so difficult in those kind of traumatic situations, because they literally do affect your brain. So that, as you said, you can't necessarily think clearly, and you can't process things maybe as you would normally do before this traumatic encounter. And so this sense of having people that can offer you perspective, and then also that information, gathering the information, brilliant.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, it's important to also note the other thing that you've got in your favour is that graduate programmes want you to finish.
Yes.
They want you to finish. And also, if your employer is helping with this, or you're part funded by your employer or your funding body, they also want you to finish. People have to explain why you have not made progress. So I think that's why looking at what is the supervisor-supervisee relationship, what is the expectations of what your PhD should involve, what is the standard you should be working at, where is there help available? For example, if you're struggling with particular areas, is there extra help you can have? And I think the point you just made there, Emma, about perspective is really good as well, because sometimes I think, and this is not in any way to sort of discredit people who are being bullied or to sort of diminish what they're going through, there is a confusion, and an understandable unhappy confusion, between where you need to have some kind of performance review or feedback or suggestion that your work is not good enough. And my work wasn't good enough during my PhD a lot of the time. It needed improving, and I didn't like that. I still don't, if we're honest. If we're really honest, none of us really like that. And there's ways in which that can be delivered. And I think sometimes people get confused between unpleasantness and temporary, or awkwardness or unpleasantness that is actually part of the process, or difficulty or challenge. And actually what is bullying, which is more systematic, it's designed to stop you working. I think there's a difference between being told something to improve your work, even if you don't like to hear it, and something that's actually really destroying you. It's harming your confidence, it's hurting you. So I do think having, again, looking at working with other people, with peers, getting some perspective gives you a sense of actually, actually this is not okay. There's a difference between my friend who has a supervisor who sits down and talks them through stuff, and yes, they come out thinking, oh, I've got to do that rewrite, and I really didn't want to have to go back to the literature, and I'm feeling further behind than ever, but I can do it because we've actioned what we're going to do next. And somebody who had half an hour being screamed at, it's I mean, I've made two very big differences, but it's often not easy to tell, and I think a perspective really helps.
Yes. And then you said, so that's if that's happening to you. And then you said about this sense of, well, I wonder if you have any thoughts of if it's happening to somebody else.
Yeah. And I think, again, this is where we need to be brave. So I think because we know bullying is so common, I think it's something like, I think it's the Nature survey that found it was like something like 1 in 5 PhDs. It's a huge number are directly reporting bullying. And that's before we come on to the sort of, I think, the grayer area where it probably is also bullying, but they may not notice it or perhaps don't want to say it. And I think we have sort of, the interesting thing is when you research or teach on bullying, and as I do, among other things, it's the only area, it's really interesting. I do lots of other sensitive topics and people never, ever say, oh, well, the participants are exaggerating or lying. So, for example, a lot of the work I do is on pregnancy and baby loss. And no one has ever said to me there, well, those people are just exaggerating about how sad they feel after their losses. No one's ever done that. And I don't think they would, because it would be outrageous. But when it's bullying, there's often a sense of saying, oh, it's exaggerated, or it's not really true, or these people are oversensitive. And it means that a lot of people who are already minoritized, people of the global majority, people who are international students, disabled people, will often not report it, actually, because they are scared of being kicked off their course or further abuse, or that perhaps they already feel like they are asking for a lot and they don't want to talk about it anymore. I mean, I certainly remember when I was sick during my PhD, that awful feeling of people saying, how are you? And you truthfully wanting to say, I'm really not well, but their eyes starting to glaze over, or them sort of, even rolling their eyes and sighing, and you feeling like you can't say it. So I think that we, as bystanders, or sometimes people call them upstanders, need to play a role. We know it's a problem. We hear it's a problem. We've probably seen it, actually. And we often don't want to do anything about it because, understandably, who wants to be next? When you witness somebody being shouted at or crying in their office, or that somebody's having to take an extension, or even that you hear they're being badmouthed, which is a thing that bullies often do, is that they'll say that the person, it's not them, the bully, it's the victim who's the one at fault. You don't want to be in that category, of course you don't. But the more we don't stand together, the more this will continue. And in fact, the biggest solution, the easiest solution we have is making this something that is not tolerated. Now, we might feel like it's a hopeless situation, but I can tell you in the last 5 years, things have dramatically improved. Not perfect at all, but funding bodies have started to pay attention. And it's mainly because people aren't completing, but they're paying attention. A lot of big organisations, research organisations, academic publishers are also talking about it. And social media has made a big difference in that now we can flag it up when it's happening. It relies often on people who have left academia, that no longer work in a university, or who are in very senior positions to do it. But all of us can do it. So that was a very long-winded introduction to say, what can we do? We can notice. We can use what they call the 5 Ds of being an active bystander. So that means, the first thing you might do is describe it when you see it happening. If you see somebody acting in a bullying way, you call it out. You either call it out directly to the bully. So you say, that's not all right. Okay, we don't shout in that meeting. In a conference where somebody's started to sort of do the more of a question and the comment, and it's
yeah.
We've all been there when it's actually getting quite spiteful.
Yes.
Actually somebody says, hang on, this isn't okay. Now, a victim often won't, because they're too frightened, or they're just totally taken aback by how horrible it is. Yes. But if we're all sitting there, if you're sitting there thinking, gosh, I ought to tweet, this is terrible, don't just tweet that it's terrible. Stand up and say, this isn't okay. This is not all right. You can build in codes of conduct where we actually say directly, this is what we will and won't discuss. This is what bullying is, and this is what we won't tolerate. Bullies really, really rely on us. Think of academia as the place of discourse and debate and intelligent people being able to describe the most complicated things. And yet you tell me that we can't actually say in an agreed upon way what bullying is and that we're not going to accept it. Of course we can. We absolutely can. The reason bullies don't want us to is because it catches them and holds them accountable. So we can document from the outset within our departments, within our programs, within our events, within everything, what bullying is and what we're not prepared to put up with and what the consequences will be. And that makes it easy for everybody because and people might moan about the fact that they can't say or do anything anyway these days, but good, actually, because screaming at people at events or touching people up or groping people is not acceptable behaviour anywhere. It's not okay. So I think... Yeah, I'm on a rant now.
No, I'm loving it. I'm yes, keep ranting. Because it is so important. It's so important. So important.
And I think we're almost frightened to sometimes say this, that actually we can be quite bold and say we're going to do this thing. So the first D, in our Ds of bystander intervention is that we are directly saying what is and isn't okay. And then, we can delegate other people to help. We can have people within the department, our union reps maybe, but also people that you can go and talk to. It could be a buddy system or a friendship system or a peer support system. It can be regular meetings. It's places where we meet and gather. Now, the pandemic has made this harder, although online spaces are thriving, where you have to be careful because, as I've mentioned with bad-mouthing, quite often victims are made out to be, incompetent or awful or terrible by bullies. And if we immediately jump in with that, sometimes we get the wrong person. Sometimes we're there joining in with bullying and actually we miss the person who's directing us is the bully. So we need to be careful, but we certainly can delegate in terms of ensuring lots of people are responsible. And if we're witnessing some active bullying, that actually maybe somebody goes grab security or somebody goes and sits with the victim and somebody else is documenting it and somebody else is actually talking privately or publicly to the bully, that we know our roles, that we know what to do. And again, if there's lots of us doing it, you suddenly feel much braver. If it's just you doing it, it's scary. But actually lots of us doing it is important. And you'll notice with these things, they're action-based. A lot of the time we can, signal it. And I think this came out a lot with sort of Black Lives Matter, that universities and individuals in universities, filled their social media with black squares, but nobody changed anything about bullying. Or you can wear a safety pin to show you're an ally, but then you're in a public place and somebody's being a victim of homophobic or biphobic or transphobic abuse and you don't say anything. Just signaling you're the safe person doesn't make you a safe person if you don't act like the safe person. But doing that on your own is hard, especially if you're already minoritized. And I think sometimes the things that we might do to call in help, for example, security, if that's actually going to aggravate or inflame the situation. So, for example, you've got somebody bullying a person. We've seen with cases where a white supervisor's bullied a black student, and security has been called to tackle the white supervisor, but the student's been the one that's ended up becoming, either pushed off campus or in other ways restrained or challenged or other abuse. We need to sort of sort this out at all levels, really, that if we're going to stand together, that's great. But if we call on help, is the help going to be helpful as well? So when we're delegating, we need to think about it. The other thing we can do is distract. So quite often you can say to the victim, oh gosh, there's a phone call. Can you come with me? And get them away from the person who's shouting or the person who's saying unpleasant things. Or you've got a meeting and someone suddenly started being really personal or passive aggressive. And we all kind of recognize this stuff, actually. Or if we don't all recognize it, enough of us do. If you're in a meeting, especially if you're feeling quite junior and powerless and somebody's actually being unpleasant or talking over or taking credit, you can say, I just need to go and get the coffee. Can someone help me with that? But by the way, I'm sure that was so-and-so's work you're chatting about there, and you've deflected and you've distracted and they may not be thrilled that you've done it, but you've done it. And, you might be shaking and anxious, but you did the thing. So I think there's some advice I've seen on bullying that says you must always stay with the victim and you must always shout and speak out. Actually, I don't know that that's good advice, because sometimes if you're in a more vulnerable position than they are, you could actually become in very much at risk. So when we talk about, doing first aid, the first thing you check is that you are safe within the environment before you go to give help. You don't run into a burning building, for example. You would try and get the fire brigade to help you. It's in this case, you might call for reinforcements. You might do something small, but you're going to do something, even if it's documenting or keeping receipts. I know a lot of victims do complain about the fact that people will sit through a meeting where it's quite obvious that bullying has happened, or they're in a lab situation where there's endless bullying, or there's field work and there's a problem, and someone will say afterwards, oh gosh, that was awful. Or they'll see something happen on social media and they'll privately message and say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear what you've gone through, but they don't do something publicly. You need to get together with other people and collectively do something publicly, in a way that doesn't make the victim at more risk and in a way that doesn't actually make it all about you. It's going to hold the bully accountable. And that brings us on to, I think, the next D, which is that you document everything. You take records, you make a note of what that is. And you're quick to step in if you spot something and to stop it, but also you don't, because you've stopped it, just ignore it. If you caught somebody shouting at a colleague, or if you've discovered that a supervisor is persistently undermining one student in front of another, or they're denying accommodations to a disabled student, you can talk to them about it, but you don't leave it there. And I think for any of us who are in a position to do something with our status, with our power, that we make the most of that as much as we can. I think that the thing to note with all of this is that bullying, it breeds fear. It frightens us. It frightens us into being silent. And the victim, I know, as being, someone who's experienced bullying, is you're exhausted and you haven't the energy to fight it. And you're frightened if you do fight it, that quite often bullies do threaten you. They don't just do a sort of arbitrary thing. I think a lot of us know of academic bullies who've absolutely destroyed careers. And so what tends to happen is people will take a demotion, or they'll move sideways, or they'll go quietly, or they'll leave for another job, or they'll leave academia completely rather than confront. So the final thing to remember is universities absolutely hate bad publicity, and they really hate it at a point of time when they're trying to deliver on what they consider products. Products are degrees. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm saying this is how they see themselves. So what they want is the glossy project to have finished and lots of press coverage. What they want is for people to be processing across the stage, getting their degrees and paying lots of money to do so, and lots of social media. What they want is lots of students coming to their university. What they don't want is people to know, what it is actually like to study there. They don't want the funders to know that actually in this particular lab, everybody is terrified. They don't want people to know that in this particular department, the head of department is stealing everybody else's work, or that, there's a sexual predator in the building. They don't want to know that. So again, while being careful, and I think while going through procedures, start to gather the evidence, start to work within the systems. And if those systems are not going to assist you, then you think about working collectively and publicly.
Amazing. Lots there. And just to people, you don't have to do it all at once. It's a process, and thinking through what the kind of the best next step for you in your situation. Thank you so much, Petra. I kind of feel, because I always ask for a top tip, and there's so much that you've already given to us. I wonder if there was one thing that you'd like people to take away from this, what would it be? Is that too unkind a question?
No, it's a good question, and it's at the risk of sounding a bit like Jerry Springer from years back. It's the tip with this is you look after yourself and each other. That's the biggest thing we can do, is care for ourselves first and then care for one another.
Amazing. And I do just want to mention your book again, because it is so great. I'm not on a commission or anything, people. I just think it's brilliant. It's called Being Well in Academia: Ways to Feel Stronger, Safer and More Connected. And it's got really practical ideas, loads of resources in. So I really would recommend it to people, and I'll put the details in the show notes. Thank you so much, Petra, for your time and for all the work that you're doing, because it's brilliant. And thank you all for listening.